Today is April 13th, 2015, and I am talking about some of the government rapes that occurred against me. Right now, I'm going to mention a couple of things that pertain to some of the rapists that I've already mentioned. And one thing is that obviously they were all interconnected. They all worked for the government. They were all connected to adults, parents that worked for the government, and they all, in various ways, knew one another. So, the kids of these families and parents, they ended up being government employees themselves, and for some reason, I am not quite sure what inspired, I guess, a few of them to assault me on or around Thanksgiving Day specifically, but or to do some sort of harm to me at that time. But I do know that Mike Tanzer raped me on one occasion approximately about that time, and had stolen a ring from me. And I know that Robin Bechtold specifically targeted me for Thanksgiving Day, and had me going to meet him and some other government kids that particular day. The second time he raped me. And then Chris Dabney over on the East Coast, he was also present. I saw him in both Washington State and Oregon State, and even though he lived in Washington, D.C., and he and his colleagues at the Post Pub had me fired from my workplace when I was pregnant on Thanksgiving Day, and I was out of housing at the same time as well. So so a number of times I was being assaulted or had something planned against me for Thanksgiving Day for whatever reason. And I know that sometimes when I was a little girl, when I was younger, I was being called, you turkey or whatever, and being hit over the head with a pot or a skillet or some other object. And I am not sure that this other thing that I'm thinking of has anything to do with it, but it's possible. But when I was younger, I was going to Oregon State University, and it was basically something that they've never admitted to, like the university hasn't. And I guess it's because back then it was considered to be a quote-unquote pilot program. I did everything online. I was supposed to be anonymous or only known to certain individuals. And I was a minor. And the funds for that, I had heard that someone specifically had paid for it for me for one time. But another time around, I was told it was coming from my GI Bill. And I was never formally enlisted in the military. I mean, I actually did literally sign papers for the military that said I was enlisted. I mean, I went to ROTC meetings in Oregon when I was here for a short time, and I also went to a boot camp, like a full-fledged boot camp, and I made it all the way through boot camp, in fact. And but I mean, it was like 3 months or so. It was a little, maybe a little less, but approximately 3 months of boot camp at a specific location in the United States. And what I had been told at one point was that something to do with the college that I was doing back then. I was told it was a pilot program, quote unquote, a testing kind of a deal. And then I was also told someone helped sponsor it or paid for it, and then I was also told that it was part of my GI Bill. But the problem for me is that I don't have any evidence. I mean, anything that I've ever had has been stolen from me, and and the military has, you know, lied, and they will not admit that I was ever in the military, but I was. And I guess part of the reason they won't admit it is because technically you're not supposed to be in the military, or you can't be until you're like at least age 15. I mean, you can be in the military if you give consent, and then you have a parent or a guardian give consent. So you have to get a parental signature to be involved, you know, technically. But I think that the age for that, like the law, I'm not sure, but I think that it's age 15 is the earliest you can be enlisted with a parental signature. And I was getting quote unquote enlisted when I was a preteen. I was being used before that, but my enlistment processes were well before age 15, and so I think that possibly that's just why no one in the military will admit it, and possibly also why Oregon State University, since they are a military university, they were the first university in the United States of America that was strictly military based. And they still have an extremely strong, you wouldn't really know it because it's agriculture based now and science based, but their foundation is military, and they still have that. They still have that about them. It's just not talked about very much, and it's not in the forefront. So so I think that this is why there's a full denial of all of these things that I was involved in, which, you know, makes it very hard for me to navigate in my own life. And as to the military, I was enlisted with the U.S. Army, and then before an actual enlistment with the Army, or maybe it was after my boot camp, I'm not quite sure, but I was sent to West Point. So I was at West Point at one time, but actually when I got sent to West Point, from what I remember, I think that it was right after I was overseas somewhere. I had been trafficked somewhere, and then I went straight from that overseas location to West Point, because I think with the boot camp, it was a different military group, and it was just like a 3-month deal, like the full boot camp thing, and then they discharged me. Like then it was, for whatever reason, time was up or something. But I'd have to think about it more, because there was more than one time that I was with the military. And another example of a time that I was with military, I was with Navy SEALs. So I was, and that's not West Point. I mean, that West Point is its own thing. I basically sat across the table at the cafeteria from James Cartwright at West Point. But the Navy SEALs were a whole different thing. And I was not with the Navy SEALs for a really long time, but it was an extremely intensive time. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the time frame was, possibly a month or less than a month maybe, but it was really intense. I mean, the physical demands of that training were really were very extensive. And then much earlier than that, the first kind of military that I remember being associated with was flying. Because I actually was trained to fly planes. And I think some of that possibly came from England. I mean, I know that some of that was from England. Some of that was Sandhurst oriented. But I think, I'm not sure with the U.S., but some of the work that I did in the U.S. with that, I am not quite sure if it was like specifically well, no, it was Air Force, because actually I was in an Air Force training thing. Oh, my dog is just getting caught up in the net. and some cords. Here, move your foot. There. I have a heater on, and she's wanting to be on my lap. She's a huge dog. She just can't always be on my on my lap. So anyway, I was initially when I was really little, was it Air Force? I can't say that it was actually Air Force, but there was a time actually that I was in the Air Force too. Like, I'm not really sure. I mean, like, what kind of a kid gets moved around from all of these different military groups, one to another? And I honestly don't have any idea why that was done, but I was in the Air Force. I was in Air Force training school, and it was a lot like the what you see in Top Gun, in that movie with Tom Cruise. Is almost exactly like that. There was really nothing very different from the movie compared to what my experience was, and I was involved in that to the point of having, like, in class we had to have a specific kind of a pilot